The mid-1990s were the apex of American hip-hop, a sound that was redefining global culture, driven by unparalleled artistry and revolutionary energy. But beneath the platinum records and sold-out arenas lay a dangerous fault line: the escalating, toxic rivalry between the East Coast and West Coast music scenes. This was a conflict fueled by territorial pride, media exaggeration, and immense commercial pressure. At the epicenter of the West Coast movement, towering above the entire conflict, was one figure: Tupac Amaru Shakur. Tupac was more than a rapper. He was a cultural phenomenon, a poet, an actor, a political revolutionary by heritage, and a street prophet by choice. His work resonated with millions, speaking to the pain, resilience, and rage of a generation. Yet, his genius was perpetually intertwined with chaos. His life was a magnet for legal battles, personal disputes, and violent confrontation. By September 1996, Tupac had found a new, powerful ally in Suge Knight, the imposing CEO of Death Row Records. Death Row was the dominant force in West Coast hip-hop, rich, ruthless, and operating with a brazen confidence that often bordered on intimidation. Tupac's allegiance to Death Row placed him directly at the heart of the coastal warfare, specifically opposite Bad Boy Records and its star, the notorious B.I.G. in New York. The stage for the final act of this conflict was set in Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas in the 90s was the ultimate playground, a city of excess, late nights, and obscured consequences. It was precisely the kind of environment where the volatile mix of celebrity, power, and unchecked bravado could ignite. The evening of Saturday, September 7th, 1996, was marked by a highly anticipated event: the Mike Tyson vs. Bruce Seldon boxing match at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. This event drew the absolute elite of the entertainment and sports world, making the arena floor a nexus of celebrity, muscle, and power. Tupac and Suge Knight, accompanied by their entourage, were prominently seated ringside. The atmosphere was electric, but tense. The air itself seemed charged with the unspoken rivalries and high stakes of the music industry. Tupac, riding a wave of professional success, was also operating at a personal peak of confrontation, rarely backing down from perceived disrespect. As the fight concluded, a quick, brutal knockout victory for Tyson, Tupac and the Death Row entourage began their procession out of the arena. This was the precise moment that the cultural fault line, which had been threatening to open for years, finally cracked, releasing a chain of events that would end in tragedy. It happened in the crowded MGM lobby, amidst the noise and the exiting crowd. An associate of Suge Knight, who was walking slightly ahead of Tupac, spotted someone he recognized: a younger man named Orlando Keffe D. Anderson, a known member of the Southside Compton Crips gang. There was a history of conflict and bad blood between the Death Row camp, who often aligned with the mob Peru Bloods, and Anderson's Crips associates. This confrontation was not random. It was personal, immediate, and utterly volatile. The subsequent action would be the catastrophic spark that defined the rest of the night. The initial encounter in the MGM lobby was a chaotic, split-second escalation. Tupac himself, perhaps recalling a previous conflict or simply reacting to the immediate tension, lunged at Orlando Anderson. In a moment, captured by the MGM's surveillance cameras, footage that would later become crucial evidence and cultural artifact, Tupac is seen delivering a brutal, decisive blow that sends Anderson reeling backward. The Death Row security and entourage immediately swarmed Anderson, delivering a fierce, sustained beating right there on the casino floor. Suge Knight, imposing and physically dominant, was right in the middle of the melee, ensuring the message of death row's power was delivered absolutely. The brutality was witnessed by hundreds of people. The message sent by death row was unambiguous. You do not cross us. You do not disrespect us. The beating was a public act of humiliation, executed with reckless disregard for the location or the consequences. The police were immediately called, but the death row crew, operating with speed and confidence, vanished into the night before officers could properly detain anyone. The aftermath of the fight was critical. Tupac had just publicly assaulted and humiliated a high-ranking member of a dangerous, organized street gang with deep ties to Compton. The implications were immediate and lethal. An act of such public disrespect demanded a violent, proportional response, according to the unwritten code of the streets. Suge Knight, seemingly unconcerned by the gravity of the attack, insisted that the group continue with the evening's plans. The destination, Club 662, a massive Las Vegas nightclub partially owned by Suge Knight himself. It was a place where death row reigned supreme, their territory, their castle. Around 10:55 p.m., the now infamous convoy began its short journey from the MGM Grand to Club 662. The centerpiece was a black 1996 BMW 750iL sedan. Suge Knight was driving. Tupac was in the passenger seat. The rest of the death row security vehicles and entourage cars followed closely behind. Tupac, energized by the fight and the adrenaline, was in a celebratory, but still highly charged, mood. He was reportedly joking with Suge, planning the next steps in their dominance of the music industry, perhaps completely oblivious to the existential threat that the public beating had just activated. The convoy, a highly recognizable procession of expensive cars and intimidating figures, moved down Las Vegas Boulevard. The route was short, cutting through the busy heart of the Strip. The lack of tactical security within the convoy itself would later be scrutinized as a catastrophic error. Despite the known dangers of the coastal feud, despite the hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on security, Tupac and Suge were in the front car, exposed, with Suge, the CEO, driving. The security detail, though numerous, was spread out, lacking the rigid formation required in a high-threat environment. The cavalcade of power and celebrity was a beacon, and somewhere, out in the dark streets of Las Vegas, the retaliation that the beating had guaranteed was already being mobilized. The seeds of the conflict sown an hour earlier at the MGM were already bearing deadly fruit, waiting for the precise moment to strike back at the figure who had dared to cross them. The journey was short and seemingly uneventful until the final moments. At approximately 11 p.m., the black BMW sedan carrying Tupac and Suge Knight stopped at a red light at the intersection of Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, just off the Strip. This intersection, busy even late at night, would become the most famous and tragic crossroads in music history. For a brief, suspended moment, the car sat exposed. Crucially, moments before the intersection, Suge Knight's vehicle was stopped by a patrol car for having excessive bass and no license plates. However, the officers quickly released them, seemingly recognizing the high-profile individuals and prioritizing other traffic issues. This was a missed opportunity. Mere minutes away from the ambush, that could have provided a police escort and perhaps deterred the attack. As the BMW paused at the red light, Tupac, sitting in the passenger seat, lowered his window. He noticed a car of women in the adjacent lane and reportedly began to flirt with them, relaxed and unaware of the immediate danger. The attack came from a direction entirely unexpected. A white, four-door Cadillac sedan, described by witnesses as being filled with 4 men, pulled up silently alongside the BMW on the passenger side where Tupac was sitting. The movement was swift, precise, and professional. Before either Tupac or Suge Knight could react, a rapid-fire burst of gunfire erupted from the Cadillac. The windows of the BMW exploded into shattered glass. The killer, or killers, in the Cadillac focused their fire entirely on the passenger side. At least 14 shots were fired. Suge Knight, shielded by the engine block and his own imposing size, sustained minor injuries. A grazing wound to the head. Tupac Shakur, however, was directly in the line of fire. He was hit multiple times, including rounds to the chest, pelvis, and hand. The assault was over in seconds. The white Cadillac sped away, turning south onto Koval Lane and vanishing into the Las Vegas night traffic, leaving behind the wreckage, the shattered glass, and the immediate, terrifying silence. Suge Knight, despite his injuries, managed to regain control of the bullet-riddled BMW. Driven by panic and adrenaline, he executed a frantic U-turn across the median, attempting to drive the critically wounded Tupac to the safety of Club 660, just a few blocks away. The frantic, agonizing drive lasted only moments before the car's severely damaged tires failed, bringing the BMW to a halt near the intersection of Koval and Harmon Avenue. When police and paramedics finally arrived, the scene was one of chaos. Tupac was barely conscious, bleeding heavily, his body riddled with bullets. The iconic, chilling image of the scene was later recounted by an initial responding officer. Tupac, bleeding profusely, being pulled from the car, his last lucid words to the officer, when asked who shot him, being a defiant, single expletive. "Fuck you." It was a final, defiant act of resistance against the very authority he often clashed with. Tupac was rushed to the University Medical Center, UMC. The city of Las Vegas, accustomed to violence, was now holding its breath. The king of West Coast rap was clinging to life, and the culture war had just claimed its most famous casualty. The world watched, waiting for news from the hospital, while the investigation into the sudden, brutal ambush faced an immediate, insurmountable wall of silence and suspicion. Tupac Shakur spent the next 6 days fighting for his life in the intensive care unit at UMC. His injuries were catastrophic. Despite aggressive medical intervention, he never regained full consciousness. Finally, on September 13, 1996, 6 days after the shooting, Tupac succumbed to his wounds. He was 25 years old. His death marked an immediate, seismic shift in global music and culture. The cultural war had become a literal war, and the investigation into his assassination began in earnest. The key witness was Suge Knight, who had been in the driver's seat. Yet, his cooperation was minimal. When asked to provide details about the Cadillac or the shooters, Suge consistently offered little help, citing confusion and the chaos of the ambush. His lack of cooperation immediately raised suspicion, suggesting that the code of the streets, the mandate not to speak to the police, was more powerful than the pursuit of justice for his friend and most valuable artist. The investigation by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, was plagued by fatal flaws from the beginning. Scene contamination. The crime scene at the intersection was not immediately secured, and was quickly contaminated by traffic and bystanders. Crucial evidence, including potential shell casings or fragments from the Cadillac, was likely lost in the initial chaos. Lack of cooperation. The LVMPD immediately ran into a wall of silence. The hundreds of people at the MGM who witnessed the initial beating, and the countless entourage members who drove in the convoy, refused to cooperate, citing fear or adherence to the code of the streets. Jurisdictional divide. The investigation became bogged down in the complex, interstate gang and music industry feuds that the local police were simply not equipped to handle, particularly concerning rivalries rooted in Los Angeles. The case quickly went cold, defined more by speculation and conspiracy than by facts. The absence of an official conclusion allowed a vast, dark web of theories to flourish, each one attempting to fill the void left by the police's failure. Theory 1. The East Coast retaliation. The most immediate and enduring theory linked the murder directly to the Coastal War. The narrative suggested that individuals associated with Bad Boy Records or its affiliates orchestrated the hit in retaliation for the continuous verbal and physical attacks emanating from death row. This theory became the bedrock of the tragedy, later fueled by the murder of the notorious B.I.G. 6 months later. Theory 2. The Crips' retaliation. This theory focuses specifically on the immediate catalyst, the brutal beating of Orlando Anderson at the MGM Grand. Investigators believed that Anderson, deeply humiliated, quickly mobilized associates to exact immediate revenge. The precision of the ambush, occurring just an hour after the beating, strongly supports this timeline. This was the theory later detailed by former LAPD detective Greg Kading, though never officially proven in court. Theory 3. The Suge Knight theory. This highly controversial theory suggests that Suge Knight himself was involved in the setup, eliminating Tupac due to financial disputes or the rapper's growing desire to leave death row records. Proponents of this theory point to Suge's seemingly minor injuries and his absolute refusal to cooperate with police as highly suspicious. The lack of an arrest, despite the high-profile nature of the case, allowed the Zodiac-like mythology to grow around Tupac's death. The mystery itself became a defining feature of his cultural legacy. The true killer remained hidden in the silence, protected by the fear of the death row regime and the systemic failures of the investigation. For decades, the case of Tupac Shakur's assassination was considered permanently closed, a chilling reminder of the violence inherent in the coastal rap feud. The world accepted the narrative of the unsolved drive-by. However, in the late 2010s and early 2020s, the narrative shifted dramatically. The decades of silence were broken not by a confession, but by the quiet persistence of cold case investigation. In July 2023, the investigation, which had been dormant for years, saw its most significant breakthrough. The LVMPD executed a search warrant at a home in Henderson, Nevada, linked to an individual with direct ties to the events of that night. The individual was Dwayne "Keffy D." Davis, the uncle of Orlando Anderson, the man Tupac beat at the MGM. Davis, a known figure in the Southside Compton Crips, had previously made statements in books and documentaries, claiming he was in the white Cadillac that night and knew exactly who pulled the trigger. In a stunning development, in September 2023, and Dwayne Davis was formally indicted by a Nevada grand jury on the charge of murder with a deadly weapon. The prosecution argued that, even if Davis himself did not fire the shots, he was the mastermind who orchestrated the ambush in retaliation for his nephew's beating. Davis's indictment provided the closest thing to official closure the case had ever seen. The decades of theories were finally consolidated, pointing the finger directly at the Crips' retaliation theory, fueled by the humiliation at the MGM Grand. The mystery of Tupac's death, which defined a generation, has now entered its final phase, a courtroom trial. The goal is no longer to find the phantom shooter, but to establish the final, legal truth of the assassination. The silence that protected the killers for 27 years has finally been broken, proving that even in the most complex cultural conflicts, the pursuit of justice endures.